120,000 soldiers trapped. No fuel, no ammunition, no food. In Washington, the most powerful military machine in human history, sitting on its hands because there is literally nothing it can do. What you are about to hear is not analysis. It is an autopsy. And the body on the table is the myth of Israeli military invincibility. Let me be clear about who I am and why what I am saying matters. I served as a Marine Corps intelligence officer. I sat inside the American national security apparatus at levels most people do not reach in a lifetime. I reviewed war plans, intelligence assessments, and logistics architectures for conflicts across 3 decades. And I am telling you, with the full weight of that experience behind every word, what Iran executed over 5 days against the IDF supply chain is the most comprehensive, most surgically precise, most strategically complete interdiction campaign I have ever studied. Not in briefing documents, not in historical case studies, ever in any conflict at any scale. What the mainstream media will not tell you, because telling you would require them to dismantle 20 years of carefully constructed narrative about the balance of power in the Middle East, is that this was not a military engagement. It was a controlled demolition. Iran did not fight Israel. Iran switched Israel off. And the architecture of how they did it, the sequencing, the targeting logic, the operational discipline required to execute 5 simultaneous phases against redundant systems without a single phase failing, that is what I'm going to walk you through today. Because once you understand the mechanics, you will never look at this region or at American power the same way again. Start with the foundational reality that almost nobody in Western commentary is willing to state plainly. A modern army does not run on courage. It does not run on training. It does not run on ideology or nationalism or the quality of its officer corps. A modern army runs on logistics, fuel, ammunition, food, spare parts, medical consumables, the invisible river of material that flows from port facilities through road and rail networks into forward depots and ultimately into the hands of the soldier in the fighting position. Cut that river, and the most sophisticated military force on earth becomes, within days, a collection of very well-armed, very well-trained, and completely immobile human beings sitting in positions they cannot advance from, cannot be reinforced to, and cannot safely extract from. That is not theory. That is the operational reality that every serious military planner understands at a foundational level. The question that Iran answered over 5 days, the question that should be occupying every defense ministry and every war college in the world right now, is this: how do you cut that river when the river has been engineered with 50 years of American technical assistance specifically to survive being cut? The answer, and this is where the professional sophistication of what Iran accomplished becomes genuinely arresting, is that you do not attack the river at one point. You attack every point simultaneously, including the points that exist specifically to compensate for attacks on the other points. You eliminate the redundancy by striking every redundant pathway at the same moment so that the system has no surviving mechanism through which to route around the damage. When every port is struck, every bridge is destroyed, every forward depot is burning, and every airfield capable of receiving heavy cargo aircraft has cratered runways. There is no logistics system left. There is only the clock that counts down from whatever stockpile remains to the moment when the last round is fired. The last fuel tank runs dry, and 120,000 soldiers confront the physical reality of what supply chain collapse actually means for human beings in active combat conditions. Iran did not improvise this. I want to drive that point home because the instinct in Western analysis, and I have watched this pattern play out across 3 decades of professional observation, is to explain away military success by non-Western actors as luck, as confusion on the other side,
as some operational anomaly that preserves the underlying assumption of Western superiority without requiring anyone to revise it. That instinct is analytically bankrupt in this case. What Iran executed was the product of years of systematic intelligence collection, target development, and operational planning. Years. The precision with which Iranian targeting databases reflected the actual locations of IDF forward logistics depots, facilities whose coordinates represent some of the most closely held operational security in the Israeli military system, is a finding whose intelligence implications extend far beyond the immediate military situation. Someone built that database. Someone updated it. Someone verified it against current operational configurations. And that process did not begin last month. The campaign opened at 2:40 in the morning on day one. I want you to register that timing because it reflects a specific operational logic. 2:40 in the morning is the hour of minimum human alertness, minimum institutional responsiveness, and minimum ability to execute the kind of rapid damage assessment and emergency response that might, in some alternate scenario, have allowed Israeli logisticians to begin rerouting supply flows before the interdiction was complete. By choosing that moment, Iranian operational planners ensured that the full scope of Phase 1 was complete before Israeli command could transition from shock to organized response. Phase 1 struck Israel's 3 functioning port facilities simultaneously. Ashdod, the primary military import terminal handling approximately 55% of IDF equipment and munitions imports by sea, absorbed 34 impacts in a strike package that lasted 28 minutes. I want you to understand the targeting logic inside that strike package because it reflects a level of operational sophistication that goes well beyond simply putting warheads on port infrastructure. The container handling cranes serving the military cargo terminal were struck individually, not the terminal building, not the administrative complex, the cranes. Because cranes are what move military cargo from ship to shore, and destroying the cranes means that even if a vessel somehow reaches Ashdod through the subsequent interdiction environment, it cannot offload. The fuel offloading pier was destroyed in a sequencing pattern specifically designed to produce complete structural collapse rather than repairable damage. The distinction matters enormously. Repairable damage buys you days before the facility is functional again. Complete structural collapse buys you months. And in the context of an acute supply crisis, months is operationally equivalent to forever. The bonded military warehouse complex received penetrating warhead impacts designed to achieve internal detonation of stored munitions, not merely collapsing the external structure, but destroying what was inside it. Haifa, the northern port serving as the primary logistics gateway for forces on the northern front, absorbed 41 strikes with specific targeting focus on its military fuel terminal and the rail connection linking port to forward logistics base network. The Red Sea port, representing Israel's only non-Mediterranean maritime import pathway, was struck by 18 weapons that destroyed its container handling infrastructure and severed its road and rail connections to the rest of the country. By the time the sun came up on day one, 90% of Israel's maritime import capacity was gone. Not degraded, not damaged, gone. But here is what the cable networks are not explaining to you. And this is where the operational picture becomes something genuinely different from a successful strike campaign. The destruction of the ports was not the end of Phase 1. It was the beginning of the sequence, because Iranian planners understood something that their Western counterparts apparently not fully internalized. Destroying the entry point means nothing if the system can route around it, and the IDF logistics system had been specifically engineered with American assistance to do exactly that, which is why Phase 2 was already underway before Phase 1 was fully concluded. Phase 2 targeted the overland logistics network, 12 major road bridge crossings on the primary logistics routes between Israel's central stockpile complex and its northern and southern operational fronts were struck with precision weapons, achieving structural collapse at the bridge deck level, not damage, structural collapse. The rail lines serving the northern logistics corridor were struck at 9 separate points, each chosen to maximize the length of track rendered unusable by a single impact. And I want you to understand the targeting philosophy here because it represents a level of analytical sophistication that goes beyond simply knowing where the bridges are. Iran's planners did not attack the vehicles on the road. Attacking vehicles is operationally costly, produces only temporary disruption, and triggers workaround behavior that a sophisticated logistics system will execute within hours. Instead, they attack the infrastructure the vehicles must use. A destroyed bridge cannot be bypassed by a different route when every bridge on every alternate route has also been destroyed. The IDF's overland logistics capability was not degraded in Phase 2. It was structurally eliminated. And the distinction between degradation and elimination is the difference between a logistics system that is operating at reduced efficiency and a logistics system that has ceased to function. Stay with me, because Phase 3 is where this campaign transitions from impressive to something that should be genuinely alarming to anyone who has spent serious time thinking about how modern military power actually works. Because Phase 3 did not target infrastructure that appears on satellite imagery and in publicly available port records. Phase 3 targeted the IDF's forward logistics depots, the hardened, dispersed, operationally secret stockpile facilities maintained in theater to sustain operations for a defined period without resupply. These are not places that appear on maps available to the public. Their locations are among the most closely held operational security information in the Israeli military system, protected by multiple layers of access restriction and counterintelligence procedure. 11 of Israel's 14 identified forward logistics depots were struck. 11 out of 14. The 3 that survived did so because they were located within urban areas where the collateral damage calculus constrained the strike package, a constraint that Iranian planners appear to have consciously incorporated into their targeting architecture, which is itself a reflection of operational discipline that many Western analysts would not have predicted. The surviving depot inventory after Phase 3 represented supply availability of between 3 and 7 days at current consumption rates, and that clock was already running by the time the assessment was complete. You think you've heard the worst of it? You haven't. Not even close. Because everything I have described so far, the ports, the bridges, the rail lines, the forward depots, all of it exists within a planning framework that American and Israeli logisticians had already gamed. They had already identified maritime interdiction as a risk. They had already built the compensating mechanism into the contingency plan. And Iranian operational planners knew they had done so, which is why Phase 4 existed. Phase 4 addressed the emergency resupply pathway that American and Israeli planners had specifically identified as the primary compensating mechanism for maritime and overland interdiction. Air logistics, the runways at Ben Gurion International Airport, serving as the primary entry point for air-delivered military cargo, were struck at 6 separate points with penetrating warheads designed to produce subsurface detonations, creating craters resistant to emergency repair. Ramon Airport in the south, the secondary air logistics facility, was struck simultaneously. The military airfields with runway capacity sufficient to handle heavy cargo aircraft had already been rendered non-operational in the preceding strikes against IDF bases. By the end of Phase 4, Israel had no functional air cargo terminal capable of receiving the heavy lift aircraft that emergency military resupply requires. The air bridge that Washington needed to execute emergency resupply did not exist, And that is not a circumstance that arose from poor planning or inadequate preparation on Washington's part. It was a condition that was deliberately engineered by Iranian operational planners who understood exactly what the American compensating response would be and designed the campaign architecture specifically to defeat it before it could be executed. That is the level of strategic thinking we are dealing with, not reactive, not opportunistic, anticipatory. Iran did not respond to American resupply planning. Iran preempted it, and now we arrive at the arithmetic, the cold, unforgiving mathematics of what supply chain collapse actually means for 120,000 human beings in active combat positions. Because this is the part of the story that most analysts skip past, either because the numbers are uncomfortable or because the human dimension of military logistics failure is harder to discuss in the clinical language that professional analysis tends to prefer. An IDF armored brigade in active operations consumes approximately 180,000 liters of diesel fuel per day across all organic vehicles, tanks, infantry fighting vehicles, artillery tractors, engineering equipment, logistics trucks. Israel had approximately 8 armored brigades deployed in operational configurations. At that consumption rate, the fuel inventory surviving the Phase 1 and Phase 3 strikes, estimated at approximately 40% of pre-campaign levels, represented between 4 and 6 days of operational consumption. By day 5, fuel availability had fallen below the minimum threshold required to sustain offensive operations. Armored vehicles began being immobilized, not by enemy action, not by mechanical failure, not by tactical decision, but by empty fuel tanks. I want that to register in its full weight. The IDF, the force that the United States and Israel spent 50 years and hundreds of billions of dollars constructing, was being rendered immobile by the simple physical fact of having nothing left to put in its fuel tanks. Aviation fuel presents an even more acute constraint. IDF air operations at current sortie rates consume approximately 2.4 million liters of aviation fuel daily. The surviving aviation fuel inventory after the port strikes and depot destruction was assessed at approximately 8 days of consumption. By day 5, sortie rates had been reduced by over 60% as fuel conservation protocols were implemented. The F-35s, Israel's most capable strike platform, the aircraft around which IDF operational doctrine for deep strike missions is organized, were being flown at a fraction of their operational tempo, their missions rationed against a fuel supply that everyone involved could see was counting down to zero. The ammunition mathematics tell a parallel story. An Israeli artillery battalion firing at standard sustained rates expends approximately 800 rounds per day. Multiply that across the artillery systems deployed across 5 active fronts. Add tank main gun ammunition, mortar rounds, anti-tank guided missiles, and the precision-guided munitions that modern combined arms combat depends on at every level. The daily ammunition consumption figure runs to thousands of tons. The surviving forward depot inventory after Phase 3 represented approximately 5 days of consumption at reduced operational tempo, and that estimate assumed consumption rates lower than what active combat actually demands. By day 5, multiple artillery units had reported exhaustion of available ammunition stocks. Fire missions were being canceled not because the tactical situation did not require fires, but because there were no rounds left to fire. And if the fuel picture is alarming and the ammunition picture is alarming, the food situation is the variable that carries the most direct human weight and receives the least serious attention in professional military analysis. Military ration supply for 120,000 personnel requires approximately 360 tons of food daily. IDF doctrine calls for forward units to carry 3 days of organic ration supply. By day 4, units in the most forward positions were consuming emergency ration reserves intended for genuine last resort situations. By day 5, operational assessments across multiple sectors included language that no military commander wants to read and no soldier wants to hear described about themselves. Personnel combat effectiveness degraded by nutritional insufficiency. Let me translate that out of the bureaucratic register and say what it actually means. Soldiers were hungry. Soldiers who are hungry make decisions differently than soldiers who are fed. They assess risk differently. They sustain effort differently. They maintain cohesion differently. And an army whose soldiers are making different decisions under the pressure of physical deprivation is not the army that its commanders planned for, trained for, or built their operational concepts around. Keep watching, because the next part of this story is where the American dimension enters, and where the gap between what Washington promised and what Washington could actually deliver becomes something that every serious student of military power needs to confront directly.